There we go. Hey, hey, hey. We're back. Season 2. Back on the air. So, welcome, everybody. Hope everybody is doing well. We are glad to be back with Season 2 of this series, Keys to AWS Optimization. And we'll go into what this show is about and what we're going to talk about in a minute. But before we get started, Ali, welcome back to the show. How are you doing today?
I'm so excited to be back, and I am doing great. It's been awesome to hear there's school buses going behind me. It's a sunny day in Seattle, so I can't complain.
Nice. Yeah, it's been a bit of a grim day today down in London, but happy to be back on the airs with all you guys. So this is going to be fun. So we'll get into it. So welcome everyone to the Keys to AWS Optimization, the show where we share stories, concepts, and solutions to help you unlock your cost optimization at AWS. My name is Stephanie Gooch, and I'm a commercial architect at AWS, and I'm coming up to my 1-year anniversary of working at this awesome company. So really excited about that. Ali, why don't you give a bit of background on yourself and what you do at Amazon?
Awesome. So I'm also a commercial architect, and I get the joy of working with Steph every day. And I actually just hit my 2 years at Amazon, although I still feel like I'm in my first month, always learning something new here. And before joining, I was a customer, so in a lot of the same shoes you guys are.
Nice. And if you want to check out Ali's previous episode, I'll add that in there down there. So she was on talking about the well-architected framework, and if you do anything with well-architected framework, you could get some of this swag that I am showcasing today for the Curve Query library, which we will be probably mentioning a bit later. So a big part of this show is hearing from you guys. So come on to the chat. Let us know your questions, your ideas. If you've talked about the subject we're going to talk about, let us know what you've done. And also, if you have any questions about it or any other subjects, we can try and answer them and help you today. So the subject in which we're talking about today is S3 optimization. And this is quite a big topic. So today we are just going to focus on kind of the high level, the basics of S3 bucket saving is what I've called the show today. So we want to talk about the high level stuff just to get you started. And the thing with S3 bucket is it's almost guaranteed that you have one. So a lot of services rely on it, things like CloudTrail or Athena, they rely on you having an S3 bucket. So without even really realizing, you're probably going to be storing data that you could optimize. And so we're going to be sharing with you some ways in which you're doing that. And for those who are maybe new to the show, every time we try and do one of these subjects or any subject, we want to give you information in which you could take away and go and implement it into your organization or your account kind of straight away after, because we really want to help you save that money or improve your cloud financial management. So if you don't know what S3 is, it's a simple storage solution. It's one of the kind of old products that AWS has had. It came out in 2006, and it's all about object storage, kind of simple putting things into the cloud. But Ali, do you want to go over a bit about how we charge for S3? Because that is something we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, definitely. And actually, I'm going to switch it up on you for a second, Steph, because I want to give a little background on why we're choosing to do S3 today.
Good point.
Today is Amazon Storage Day. And if you haven't heard about Storage Day, Steph is going to be pasting the link in. I highly recommend all of you attend it. There's a leadership track, and there's also a technical track. And it's going to cover more than just Amazon S3. It's going to cover a lot of our other storage services as well. They're going to be talking about, new things coming to the product and new innovations, as well as ways to best use it in common use cases there. You'll hear from a variety of our leaders, but also be able to have any of those technical questions answered as well. So highly recommend you tune in. And I actually believe it's on Twitch as well.
Amazing. Just segue straight over there. So yeah, check it out. Really recommend all these kind of get some more information from the experts themselves.
Definitely. And so kind of bringing it back to the basics then, you'll be able to learn a lot more in Storage Day and then also in our future sessions. But for today, just kind of getting you started is, let's talk about the different types of classes. So there's 6 different types of storage classes, and they depend on which one you're going to use, depends on, what is your data that you're using, how do you want to access it, and how often. So, depending on where it's at and what your use cases are there. The most common one is standard. And so essentially, if you don't know what to use, the first kind of tier and the most accessed is standard. And that's where it's active, frequently accessed data, and with the first byte in latency in milliseconds. This is probably the most common used across the board. And actually, I was doing a look back on my own S3 buckets before this call, and I have way too much in S3 standard. But that tends to be the use case. You kind of drop it in there, forget about it sometimes. But it is kind of the most basic, high-level starting point for storage. And then there's intelligent tiering. Intelligent tiering takes that standard storage class and also uses the next storage class below it, which is standard and frequent access, which is for your more infrequent access data, and still has that first byte of latency in milliseconds, but it's a little bit more affordable because you have some fees if you actually want to go and retrieve it. And so what intelligent tiering actually does is it automatically moves those data between standard and intelligent tiering, standard and infrequent access after looking at it for the past 30 days. It's hands-off optimization. And so intelligent tiering is kind of a common getting started use case if you don't know, what storage class to be in and you don't have too many objects there, because it does have a per object monitoring fee. And then we have one zone infrequent access that kind of is like standard infrequent access, but it's going to be for data that can be more recreatable because it's only using one zone rather than standard infrequent access that uses typically 3 zones. And so this is kind of good for kind of some testing workloads or things that you can recreate. I wouldn't put, your production only copy type of workloads in this, because not really the best use case there if it's only in one zone as well. And then you have Glacier. This is going to be your kind of archive data. This is where the latency kind of goes from milliseconds. It's going to actually be more in minutes or hours. So these are going to be data that you're not going to access as most common. And typically, actually, we see folks saying, "I don't need to delete this. I'm just going to archive it." And that's what they mean by doing that. They're sending it to actually Glacier. And then there's Glacier Deep Archive. This one's for even longer term. And so your first byte of latency is actually in hours here. And, this is going to be for things that you very rarely need to access and are able to take advantage of that really low cost.
Okay. Do you want to go over the byte and latency bit, what that actually means in terms of like layman's terms?
It's essentially the way I like to think about it. It's going to be the first second that you'll see your data. So when can you actually, first access it then? And so that's what I mean by latency there.
Awesome. And so great explanation. I've put on, and I can put it back up again, there it goes, the storage classes. If you wanted to kind of look through the list, please go on that link to just kind of want to check how we're talking about them. But then, so how do they rank in terms of price, Ali?
So they rank in terms of price from, most expensive is standard because it's readily accessible and, always available there in terms of, you don't have to pay for any retrieval fees. And then it goes kind of to the lowest cost, which is going to be that Glacier Deep Archive. The one kind of caveat there is intelligent tiering. You're charged the same rate as that storage class that it's in, whether it's standard and frequent access or just standard, or even Glacier or Glacier Deep Archive, because that's now actually available for opt-in there. But you are charged that monitoring fee. So in theory, it is slightly more expensive, but it can save you a lot of money.
Definitely. And that's a great segue. So now we've kind of covered what the different storage classes are. What would be your kind of top couple of ways for people to go away today and try and save money? Because as we said, everybody's got buckets. There's always some ways to save money. So what would you advise people look out for? And what do you tell your customers to look out for?
Yeah, definitely. So, taking a step back, first, what can you do? There's kind of really 2 kind of key areas of optimization just from a getting started standpoint. And what that means is 2 different ways that you can, control how your objects are stored within Amazon S3. That's going to be life cycles. And a life cycle is like a life cycle policy that you can put in place that will move your data between storage classes and transition it, or it will also delete it. So for example, you might want to transition objects older than 180 days to Glacier, or you might want to have a policy to automatically cancel all of your incomplete multi-part uploads. Or for example, another, probably the most common use case I see with a lot of my customers is deleting non-current versions after a certain amount of days that they deem.
Yeah, definitely those two, the moving the incomplete uploads and the versioning. I've preached this before to my customers, and I actually went in and looked at my account and actually looked at the versions and realized I had like 5 versions of a file that I hardly ever used, and that was just embarrassed at my own kind of waste of money. So recommend doing that. The life cycle to set up the multi-part uploads. Do you want to go into detail about what that actually means and when it might happen?
Yeah, so I think probably the first thing that I would do on this, and I'm going to kind of keep it brief on this because S3 Lens would be the first place I'd go to look for this. But essentially, like when you want to copy like a large object or something there, or upload a large object, it will do it in bunches, and there can be some incomplete aspects to this. And an incomplete multi-part upload still is being billed for that storage. And so
Right.
what you can end up having is essentially just a bunch of costs that are essentially not needed and really aren't usable. And so you can just set up a simple lifecycle policy on this. It's essentially one click that will delete these incomplete multi-part uploads. S3 Lens is a place to go for that, which Steph will have a link for. But for today, even keeping it a little bit more basic, just in lifecycle policies are something you should be using readily, but you also need to understand how the data is used to be able to use them, because you don't want to accidentally put a lifecycle policy in that transitions all your data to Glacier and you didn't mean to. That can be very, very expensive. And so that's for more understanding what your workloads are doing. Intelligent tiering is the kind of other area of optimization. And this is kind of where...
Before we jump onto that, can I just pop in this question we've had, which is in a version-enabled bucket, can we have a lifecycle management policy which will delete certain versions of an object? So aka like 3 and older. Do you know if that's available?
I don't know off the top of my head, but you could do it off of age. And so depending on when your version is, you could do it off of your age. So you would just say maybe objects with versions older than X amount of days, get rid of these non-current versions. Something that you also can start to do to look at is % of your bucket that's non-current. And so that helps you kind of just start to see if you're creeping up a little bit there.
Right, yeah. And I think the best thing to kind of highlight for this question is, especially with those buckets that get the kind of regular data, you can use that kind of date concept. So if you're getting a backup kind of every week, then rather than look at like a numerical version, think about, okay, if they're doing it every week, then every like 4 weeks you can get rid of it. It's a really good way. So just to go over that again, what Ali was saying, which I think is really key, is especially with the multi-part uploads and the versioning, with the multi-part uploads, you can't use it, but you're paying for it. So if anything from today, please go and check out that multi-part upload lifecycle, because I just think there's so many people that are probably potentially wasting money there. So just recommend going out. There is, let me just throw up another question we've had. So use case for storage lens. So today we are not going to cover storage lens. I've put in a link about it. I'm doing this purely because storage lens has a lot of things going on in it, and we want to do a whole session dedicated to it. But in a summary, it's basically a tool that you can set up for free. There are some cost elements you can pay for, but in general, it's a free optimization tool which can show you lots of interesting information and metrics around your storage. So go out and check that out, and then we'll be doing a screen share in another week that we can show you kind of things to look out for.
Yes, definitely. On the S3 Lens 2 piece, it's already enabled on your account. The free version, there are paid metrics too. Free version is a great starting point. Go take a look at it there, because just understand kind of what's there available to you, and start sending it to an S3 bucket. That would be just my one kind of tip and trick there. Start sending your S3 Lens data to an S3 bucket, because you can then slice and dice it how you need to see it.
Yeah, definitely. Looking back over time, so useful for your data. As long as you can see it, you can mess around with it. And just to join in, if people that have joined us halfway through, welcome. We are talking about S3 storage, kind of the high level optimization around that. So it's a special guest, Ali. So what was the second thing you wanted to cover, Ali, before I cut you off?
Yep. So the second one was going to be intelligent tiering, which actually, tying it back to S3 Lens, intelligent tiering has that per object monitoring fee. So, and S3 Lens will actually give you your number of objects. So it can kind of help you start to price out what this potentially could be from a monitoring perspective. So if you have a ton of objects in a bucket, your monitoring fee for S3 intelligent tiering could be significantly higher and might not be the best option for you. But intelligent tiering is kind of that hands-off way for optimization. And it's going to be for folks, that aren't sure exactly what their access patterns are. You might not have predictable access patterns, so common with like data lakes, with changing access patterns used by different applications, big data analytics, and then areas where maybe there's just constraint on resources, and you just want that one-click optimization areas for buckets that you're not exactly sure how a lifecycle policy could work there.
Right. So we've had a question that is not on topic, but I feel like people might want to know this. What headset are you using, out of curiosity?
Oh my gosh, the best headset ever from our Amazon vending machines at the office. They're the ones that we all
The
get.
Poly.
I love them too. I hope I hope it's sounding okay for you guys, but it actually works really well and it keeps kind of noise out. I'd say I started with my AirPods and I kept on, forgetting to charge them or do something there. This one works great and you have a mute button on it too. So it's probably my favorite go-to, but it's also from the office, so I can't complain.
Love the sales pitch. So brief break from the S3 topics. Okay, cool. So heading back to S3, was there anything else you wanted to cover on intelligent tiering before we moved on?
I think one of the key things with intelligent tiering too is it's pretty low risk in terms of it. You have to opt in to use intelligent tiering for archive and Glacier Deep Archive use cases. And so, it's only going to start with that standard and frequent access, which, has a very, very quick retrieval rate. And so we very rarely see any performance issues with it. I've actually had a customer there's actually a blog that was just recently published for one of our customers, and they said that they have seen no performance issues with it, but we're able to see about 35% savings.
Awesome. 35%. I mean, can't get better than that. Well, you can, I'm sure, but that's a great savings start. So for those, again, who may have joined us and missed the start, what day is it today, Ali?
Storage Day.
Woo! So it's a great event happening today. I'm going to post the link again because we really want to suggest that everyone check this out. But do you want to give a brief overview again about what Storage Day is? And then we're going to move on to what you can do after Storage Day.
Yeah, definitely. So Storage Day is going to cover more than just S3. It's going to cover kind of all things storage across AWS. And you're going to hear from our leaders of the different products and services and kind of some of the new insights and innovations around them. You'll also hear from some of our teams on best use cases around it, ways to, best use the services, best practices and optimizations, as well as just what's new.
Awesome. Sales pitch right there. She's good at this. So we're going to come up with the kind of scenario. So what we're hoping is today, some of you are going to go off and go to Storage Day, learn loads about storage. You're going to start building those S3 buckets and have lots going on. But let's set up a scenario. So Ali, say your team has just gone to Storage Day. They've learned a lot. What can you do to enable them to kind of optimize what they learn and create from? What would be your first step?
Yeah, so I always like to say, let's start at the basics. And what can you do across, a grouping of your account or across all of your accounts, depending on if you only have, one or two accounts or, you own your whole management or payer account. And because you want to first understand kind of what the landscape looks like. And so let's just say that your team has gone to Storage Day and you want to help them prioritize, where to look or what's even there. The first piece of that is, do you know what you're spending? What is the cost for each of your buckets? And we're going to talk in terms of just bucket level today, because that's going to be the most easily accessible metric that you can get across Amazon for cost is going to be your just your S3 bucket level. And so what you want to first figure out is, what are you spending and what are your spend trends? So for example, what I would do is look across, maybe the previous month or last few months. A previous month is typically kind of a good quick glance, and you can look at, okay, what are my top spending buckets? What are my top growth buckets? What are my buckets that are only using a certain storage class? So for example, just using S3 standard. And if you're able to categorize just S3 standard, you can kind of separate those out. You also want to look at what buckets are using, some of the best practices already. So maybe intelligent tiering, or maybe a bucket that's using archive already, in a combination of it. So just start to kind of group and slice and dice it for kind of, how can you enable your team's post Storage Day? What you're probably going to want to look up are those top spending buckets, and also the buckets that are only using S3 standard. The reason for that, and then the reason for that is most customers have a ton of buckets. Even just myself and my test accounts, I find myself having way too many buckets. And so if I can just kind of, slice and dice it down to this subset that are probably the most feasible. So if it's S3 standard, that there's probably, at least some form of opportunity, or you'll be able to just confirm that it really needs to be an S3 standard. But if you can just start there at that only S3 standard level, you're kind of weeding out the other classes that might make it that they've already been using some of these other best practices there.
Oh, and just a shout out, there might be an S3 intelligent tiering announcement in Storage Day. I don't know what that is, but that's very exciting. I hope this person is a real Amazon employee and they haven't just spammed us. So stay tuned for Storage Day. More promotions for this. Okay, so we've narrowed it down. We've got, say I've got my top spending bucket. I'm looking at it kind of just that. It's all S3 standard. What's the next layer of detail we want to look at?
Yeah, so the next layer of detail I like to look at is it active? And how do you define an active bucket? This can vary, but typically what I look at is if there's no of the kind of common requests that we see as active, which is no put requests, so no new data coming into it, no get requests, so nothing is coming really out of it, and no copy requests, so you're not copying the objects within it, and also no put for replication, so it's not having newly replicated data dropped in there as well too. And so those are kind of the 4 areas that we consider kind of active, but you also want to check with your teams to make sure that there might be not more that you're adding into it. This is kind of just a good starting point and a quick way to kind of say, has it really actively been used?
Right. Okay. Brilliant. So looking at put, gets, replicas, and copies. Again, summary, those 4 things. And so one thing that me and Ali had a whole conversation around the other day was we're looking at these buckets. And so we've gone really deep into these get put requests and we're like, oh, they're not doing very much or they are doing a lot. We then also started talking about names. So your bucket is a unique name and there's a lot of kind of naming conventions people use with buckets. But what are things that stick out for you when it comes to names, Ali?
Yeah, so from a naming perspective, what are the kind of key names? I like to say there's 5 that I start with, but you could definitely add more. Backups, because if it's backup, there's, it's probably not being readily accessed. Archives,
right?
Historical, which are kind of all, different words for backups, but, things that maybe aren't as used. Logs is a really another great term to see.
Right.
And then compliance, because compliance are typically things that, we don't typically see being, say, deleted per se. A lot of times they're just being archived or moved to a less frequently accessed storage class. And so compliance is another keyword. And so, the next kind of piece would be those naming conventions. But, kind of going back to those active buckets for a second, what can you actually do with those active buckets? If you see that a bucket isn't active, the next thing that I like to look at within it is when was it last active?
Right.
And you can actually do all of that with your cost data, which I'll get into in a second. But going back to kind of what we were looking for and just getting started to enable your teams was S3 standard only. And so taking that S3 standard only and that active bucket summary, if a bucket hasn't been accessed in, let's just say, the last 6 months, you could even expand it to the last 12 months. And by active, we mean none of those 4 kind of active requests. That probably is a really good indicator that someone should be taking a look at it. Someone should take a peek because you're paying, monthly for that, and it's not really actively being used, and you're paying the most expensive storage for it. And so what can you do there? I say, work with your teams, give your teams those bucket names, and have them either tag it if they're really going to keep it and it needs to stay there, or have them take action on that. And that could be putting a lifecycle policy on, intelligent tiering. With it not being accessed, though, intelligent tiering, might not be the best option. You might want to go lifecycle policy. Or, actually, like with the customer I just had, they actually were like, oh, we actually don't need this anymore. They hadn't used it since 2019. And they were paying, monthly for that since 2019. So it really starts to compound. So something that, is only $1,000 a month over month for the last X amount of times can start to add up. Now take an even larger bucket with more data within it. And that cost can really shoot up, and it just won't show every month because it's not showing that compounding factor of what you've been spending on it month over month.
Yeah, definitely. That's a great point, because people think of S3 storage as a really cheap concept. It sometimes isn't even in people's top 5 spending areas. But you're right, it's not just about how much you're spending that 1 month. It's like how much you spend every year, and you do that look back, and some people, you get a bit of a shock, like, how much have I wasted on this? But then it's a great thing when you can say, oh, we've gotten rid of it and we've saved it. So top tips there: have a look for ones that aren't being active, look at their names to see if you could choose a different kind of lifecycle process or a different tier to optimize. And then one thing, I want to jump back to the naming conventions. And also there's a question which I'm going to chat about in a second as well. So one thing that me and Ali were talking about with the names was when we were looking through a customer set of data, there were some customer buckets that were kind of like CloudTrail and then account ID. And that's sometimes people make that. And if there's quite a lot of them, so there was CloudTrail account ID 1, CloudTrail account ID 2, what that probably means is someone's making that using some kind of infrastructure as code. So when there's duplicates of the same type of name, so what that means is that you can see that somebody's made some kind of Terraform or CloudFormation script somewhere that's probably doing it. So what you could do is, if you know that there's going to be a lifecycle policy that you want to use or a tier, rather than manually going through and changing all those things, go and talk to developers who create those modules and say, okay, do we need maybe a lifecycle policy for all buckets that have the backups for this certain application that's in loads of accounts? Or should, for the ones for logging, do we want to always have a lifecycle policy? Or if there's ones that are very active that we know that may have a risk of having multi-part uploads, always implement a bucket policy for that. So just kind of think about it from a holistic point of view when you're going to be reusing the same topics. And there was a question here, which was, is it possible to automate the deletion of S3 buckets when we delete a domain, since our organization, we use a huge amount of S3 buckets, but we forget to delete them? So, and I think someone else has commented, I don't think there's a native way of doing this, but I would always recommend kind of using Lambda functions. But you do have to be careful with this. If you're kind of deleting them randomly, what I would recommend is going back to the infrastructure as code and kind of get rid of it from the infrastructure as code and kind of update it that way, and have a process in which you do that, so you don't risk conflicting information happening in that. Any kind of ideas around that, Ali?
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that one. And, I think it's something that we're always seeing improvements on around it. But yeah, there's not kind of a native way to do it today. So, infrastructure as code is, typically the safest option there, and it's going to probably be the most scalable. But, you do have to empty that bucket first.
Yeah, definitely. That is a reminder, always empty before you delete. And I've just realized we're almost at time, but we haven't mentioned one of the most important things, which is, how do you see all this really useful information, Ali?
Okay, yes, definitely. So I always like to say, let's take away something that you can actually use today, make it actually actionable, something you can use to enable your teams. So we actually just shared the link for a query that you can run against your cost and usage report. It's about the time of, the new month started and the last month ended. You're probably already using this report for maybe doing some of your cost allocation and chargeback. Run this query within your cost and usage report. And what you'll be able to see is exactly those 3 different areas that we see. What are the buckets only using S3 standard? When was the last request? And it'll actually tell you if it's been actively accessed by using those 2 components, as well as, picking out those keywords that you can also add your own in. So you can actually just go copy paste that, update the query and run it in your account, and have a list for all of your buckets and a summary on each of them there. So if you run that, share that with your teams after, and you essentially have your post storage day getting started list of where should your team start to look.
Brilliant. And let us know. I would love to hear if anyone has any major breakthroughs when it comes to S3 storage. Like, drop us an email, costoptimization@amazon.com, or you can tweet me at livelikeanerd on Twitter. So feel free to do that. I won't go into the name. Probably should change it. I say that every single time it comes up on the screen. And just quickly before we go, the last question, I just saw a question. Where is it gone? Is there a cost for an empty S3 bucket? I don't think there is. Ali?
Nope, you're charged per gigabyte a month. So if it's empty, there's not a charge associated with it, but you will still see it showing up.
Right. Okay, brilliant. And for any other pricing questions, always check out the AWS pricing information that can be found with lots of detailed explanations of how you can do it. So that is it. We are at time, Sabi. That feels like it's gone by so fast. Thank you for joining me today, Ali. This has been great. First episode back. Everyone, please stick around we've got 14 more episodes to come on lots of different interesting subjects, this time every week. And next week, we're going to be talking about fin hacks, which are from the creator, Alex, who's also the co-host of this, and a little bit more about that and how you can get involved with information like that. Enjoy today, enjoy Storage Day, don't forget, and see you next week.
Thanks for having me, Steph. Thanks for joining on, everyone.
Bye.